I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar today. Appreciate all of you taking time out of your schedule to come and join me for a half hour or 45 minutes and continue the pursuit of excellence in broadcasting and especially in personality radio. My name's Tracy Johnson, and I want to welcome you to It's Supposed to Suck at First, the Air Talent Life Cycle. I'm going to show you how you can grow your show, your personality, your station, your features, through all stages of the talent life cycle today. For those of you who have never been on one of the webinars before, you can ask questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. There's a questions tab that's about 2/3 of the way down where you can just click on that tab and open it and type your questions in, and I'll be glad to take those questions on this topic or anything else that's related to it at any time once the presentation concludes today. Also, I'll let you know that you'll be able to download a copy of the outline and notes from this presentation later on today, along with a video on demand. And I'll send you a link by email to everybody who is registered for the presentation by the end of the day today, or at the latest first thing tomorrow morning. You've probably seen a chart that looks like this in reference to product life stages. This demonstrates the life cycle of a typical product. This represents the life cycle for an air talent just as well as it represents the life cycle for laundry detergent or electronics or anything else that you purchase in your everyday life. The product life stage for air talent has 4 clearly defined stages. Each have their own characteristics, and they mean different things for personalities to build their brand. We go from the introduction phase. This is the launch. It might mean that you're new to a market, or you've moved to a new station in the same market, or the station that you're on may have changed format. Anyway, you're introducing yourself to new listeners. The growth stage for broadcasters is, you're familiar to the market. You've had your introduction. They're getting to know who you are. And you've started to establish familiarity and probably a small fan base. Momentum is starting to build, and your performance has to change to match the phase that you're in. Also, your marketing changes, your positioning changes, all the messaging that you send out to your audience changes. The maturity phase is once your personality has been established and most of the market share has already been harvested. In other words, you're fulfilling your potential. You may not have gotten to the point where it's starting to tail off yet, but you've probably gotten just about all of the growth out of your market position that you possibly can. And because you've been successful, new competition is coming in and attacking that position. You're starting to lose some of those early adopters. The maturity phase is a point that really needs a lot of attention. A lot of those of you who are on this webinar today find your stations and your shows maybe in that maturity stage. And then the decline stage is the one that we don't really like to think about or talk about, but it happens to all brands. It happens to all products. Eventually, the market starts to shrink. The shrinkage could be due to the market becoming saturated. All the listeners who are candidates have been recruited and you start losing some people, or maybe they've found a different or better choice. Decline may be inevitable, but it doesn't have to mean death. Today, I'm going to show you the stages that personalities go through when developing a brand. Now, these concepts from introduction to growth to maturity and decline also apply to all aspects of your radio brand. It applies to your station brand itself. It applies to your morning show. It applies to the personalities on the morning show, and it even applies to the features on your station. So, but to avoid confusing you today, I'm going to talk about how the life stages and the product life stages apply to radio shows and personalities today. So you can easily draw the comparison and the parallels to your station brand or the feature inside your show. I'm also going to show you how to manage each stage, how to choose content during each stage, and how to make the most of each stage. And as we explore each stage of the life cycle, think about your station and your show and how it works for new shows, how it might be different if you are an existing personality, how you might be in the growth phase. What if you've moved from one station to another or your station has changed format? You got to think about it a little bit differently. Each radio brand has its own product life cycle. And in radio, that can be really tricky. And the reason it's really tricky for us in radio is because listeners have a different relationship with us. Some may be in the growth or maturity phase, and some may even be in the declining phase, while other listeners may still be in introduction. So it gets a little bit tricky and a little bit complicated. But today, hopefully, I'll be able to shed some light and make you think about things a little bit differently, and you'll understand how it works. We start with introduction. The introduction stage is where we really want to accelerate. That's our goal. We want to make our brand and our personalities as familiar and as aware as quickly as we possibly can. That's because the awareness is already low and there's a very small audience for the personality, or there might not be an audience that's tuning in for the talent at all. If a market for the talent does exist, it's probably very small, and the target listeners are really not aware of your solution. Naturally, this means that ratings impact from a personality standpoint alone is going to be very low to start. Doesn't mean there's few listeners. Now, a lot of times, personalities who've been around for many, many years, I know personalities who've been on the air for 30 years, they're still in the introduction phase, because they've never really gotten familiar. They've never really developed another reason to listen to their show other than the station that they happen to be on. The key for personalities is to accelerate this introduction. And that means we need to get the product right, and we need to get the product right as quickly as we can. It's true, the old saying, you only have one chance to make a first impression. That's true. Now, luckily, the first impression isn't necessarily the only impression, but it's a lot easier if we get it right at the beginning. A bad first impression can really damage a brand before it has a chance to establish. So it's really important that we don't promote and market our personalities before it's ready to market and promote. We've seen this mistake with a lot of radio stations. We get that new morning show on, or we get that new personality on, and we're so proud of it, we're so excited about the future and the potential, and the station is spending money on it. We've invested in this new show, so let's get out there and market it right away. There's only one problem with that. It's not ready to market right away. We've got to get it right first. Don't try to do too much at the beginning. Also seen a lot of shows who come on the air very quickly and they want to have a full show on the first day. Stop that. Don't do that. Start with a soft launch, but do go quickly. You want to accelerate the growth pattern. You want to accelerate through introduction. So you put a lot of time into it, a lot of resources and a lot of attention to accelerate the introduction. Pour your time and attention into product development. It's a great time to put time and attention in research and on-air promotion, but not necessarily external promotion. During the introduction phase, talent's goal should be to build a bridge to the audience. Listeners are tuning in for something specific. It might be for the music, it might be for information, but they're to be put into a specific mood, but they're tuning in for something specific. And if your personality can be part of that solution and align your personality with it by loving the things that the listeners love, then it's a great way to endear yourself to the audience. A great time for personalities to endorse the station. Maybe you're the voice of promos, the voice of positioning, but your marketing messages for your personality brand should be mostly around the things that the audience is already coming to you for, and you align your personality with those things that they love. You want to really keep it simple. If you were part of the Content Superhero series, you heard me talk a lot about the one thing. Know what your one thing is, or at least be seeking that one thing and really be specialists at it. Perfect it. Identify the problems quickly, identify problems honestly, find your one thing, experiment with some things, and become great at it as quickly as you can. Then develop your support materials. You start building out things like your website and your social media presence, building it around those energizing features and the one thing online and in social. Build your strategy with layers, multiple layers of engagement, and build it as much as you can around that one thing. It'll help you accelerate that introduction phase. As you experiment with different things, make adjustments. You should have a plan and know where you're going, but don't be so committed to the details of that plan that you aren't able to be flexible and make changes. Be prepared to adjust a plan based on things that you don't anticipate. You might try some things on the air and it just doesn't work. It's not coming off the way you'd expected. You're not seeing the response that you thought you might. You got to be able to respond to the market. How do you know what to adjust? You measure it. You research it. You test it. Now, research sounds expensive, doesn't it? And in the past, it has been expensive, but it doesn't have to be. You can ask listeners. You can do online surveys, online tools. You can do Facebook polls. You can get a good feel for things very quickly, and you can gather data very quickly if you promote that through your show and ask for honest feedback. You do have to ask, though. You do have to invest time and resources into gathering this information. Whatever you do, don't make adjustments based on short-term ratings performance. Ratings will always take you down the wrong path in making product adjustments. It takes time to change listener behavior. So you want to find those people who are responding to your features or responding to your personality quickly and get data from them, get information from them. In fact, ratings may actually go down at first. It doesn't mean that your features are bad or your personality is bad. Introducing change almost always runs off existing listeners. So whatever you do, don't pay attention to ratings in the introduction phase. You're making them familiar and setting a tone so you can get into growth. You also want to be fast. You want to hurry, but you don't want to rush. Remember I said that you've got to get the product right and make a good first impression, which is true. But when you get it right, we want to move fast. Introduce it heavily, develop it quickly, accelerate familiarity, and once it's right, promote it aggressively. You should have a sense of urgency here, but don't go into go mode until it's really, really, truly ready to go. Now, in the introduction phase, there's a few things that you should expect. Number one, as you're in introduction, you should expect some high costs. And the high costs come in time and in resources. Very few products are successful unless you introduce some investment in development. This is where you hire a talent coach or a consultant like me. Get the show prep materials that you need. Produce a branded theme to help the show become known more quickly. Make sure that you have all the resources to be successful. And if you're a program director, this is where you really need to spend a lot of time with the show to get on the same page, to get the show right, to be communicating daily. It's an investment in development and in growth. Should also expect mistakes. What happens when those ideas fail? Not if those ideas fail, but when those ideas fail, because there will be failure. How do you sharpen the plan? How are you going to know when it's not working? The goal here is to fail very quickly, correct it, and move on. Because even great ideas don't work for every air talent. Some things just don't feel right. Some things don't come off the way that you should. Identify those things and make changes, because you have to realize it's supposed to suck at first. Just don't let it keep on sucking. Also realize in the introduction phase, your success is all about what you do. It's the things that you're doing. It's how they get to know you. It's not really about who you are. Who you are comes later. Marketing and promotion messages should be all benefit oriented, like we talked about. And remember, listeners are in the trial phase. They may listen on occasion, but they haven't become fans yet. They're dating you, they're testing you, they're trying you out. So you want to really keep putting that best foot forward and create that good first impression. What should you sound like during the introduction phase? Here's the content mix, and this is flexible, but this is a good mix. The goal is to project your personality through everything that you do on the air, so they start becoming aware of who you are through those things that you do. A good content mix is about 35% station-oriented. This is where you're talking about the station positioning, the station's music, things that are related to that. That the station might be doing, all the promotions and contests and giveaways, but make it a big part of what you do, the music that you play and things like that. 35% should be features and benchmark oriented. Features, they're benchmark features, they're regularly scheduled events, but make that a significant part of the show as well. 20% should be about lifestyle and relationship content. And the relationship content can be just about anything. Lifestyle is like pop culture events. It's if you're a local, if local is an important part of your brand, and talking about those local events that are happening in your community and becoming aware and part of that community. And then 10% is personal observation and perspective. Things that happen in your everyday life, things that you notice, things that you bring into the show and you relate. Of course, you're putting your personality and your content through all of these elements, but that's a pretty good mix. So about a third station and promotion, about a third features and benchmarks, and the final third, a combination of lifestyle, relationship, and personal observation. The goals here in the introduction phase is to find your one thing, to fail fast and adjust, and promote and research so you can accelerate the familiarity during the introduction. The second stage of development is growth. And in the growth phase, we want to expand. We want to maximize our potential as much as we possibly can. As the show starts to gain traction, you'll see some positive momentum. You'll see some movement. You can feel it when your show starts to grow, when they start listening because of you and not just because of the station that you happen to be on. How soon a product moves from introduction to growth and how rapidly ratings follow will vary. Like I said before, some personalities have been on for decades and have never reached the growth phase. It's really not about how long you've been on, but how effective you've been on. So as you move from introduction to growth, realize that growth is all about the impact that you've had in introduction. This is the time to add fuel to the brand. Start marketing and promoting aggressively. Marketing campaigns are no longer new or about facts. It's no longer as much about the benefits than it is more about a feeling. This is a little more of a sophisticated marketing approach that adds talent as a specific reason to listen at specific times. Though promoting those established features and appointment tune-in times, those fusion force moments that we talked about in Content Superhero, should continue to be a key focal point because remember, those are the things that the audience is most attracted to. But you're starting to make it more about those specific things that attract them to your personality than you are about the bigger picture. This is also a perfect time to build a fan database. When you start getting attention, competition is going to start targeting you. There's going to be some good fuel coming in, so take advantage of that. You want to be aware of your competition, but you want to ignore their advances and you want to stay close to your listeners. Don't acknowledge that competition. Instead, keep talking to your listeners and developing that relationship with them one by one by one. It's a good time to lock in that relationship by building that listener database. Leverage word of mouth. The growth phases where listeners are starting to listen more frequently. Your P1 percentage is starting to rise. Fan base is building. They're starting to appreciate you for who you are and not just for what you do. And you're becoming part of their personal story. This is where listeners are fans. They're proud to be listeners. They call you without being prompted. They join your loyal listener club. They come out to your events and your appearances, and they're proud when they run into you at a restaurant. You start being recognized in restaurants and clubs. You can have a bad day, and you're not worried that they're going to tune out. And they're willing and anxious to talk about you, to talk about what they heard on your show that day. This is where you want to add more layers of engagement. Make it easy for them to talk about you. We have a lot of tools on the website that you can use to make your story and your station more repeatable. This is where you want to start using your social media presence more to increase the snowball effect from word of mouth and making sure that everything you do on the air is compatible with those did you hear moments that we talk about on the website quite a bit. This is also where in growth you may even exceed the station's position with your results. And I'm talking about ratings results, impact in the market results, and revenue results. The size of the market for high impact personalities in the growth phase often shows a greater demand for the show than the format boundaries on the radio station. High profile talent might be attracting people from country or classic rock or jazz to a top 40 or AC station because of the personality. And that's one of the values of the growth phase. And that's one of the reasons why it's important to fuel the growth phase with advertising and marketing. This is a highly profitable time for brands. And it also can help virtually bulletproof you from new competition because the cost of entry becomes really high because of the appeal of the personalities. That's why it's important to invest in this success. Now, a lot of times we see shows where the ratings start to happen and the profits start to come in, and it's you got a lot of good things are happening. And so, what do broadcasters do? Well, we've made it. We're there. We're done. We don't have to market it anymore. We can save that money from the promotion budget. We can save that money from the research budget. We've made it. This is the time where, since profits are highest, you want to reinvest those profits in marketing and promotion as much as you can. Now, that's not just reinvesting your profits in dollars, it's also reinvesting your time and your energy into expanding this growth phase. This ensures continued growth, and it also reduces the threat from competition. You can really discourage news stations from coming after you if you solidify and expand your position during the growth phase. So what should your content look like as you move from introduction to growth? Well, over time, and you don't flip a switch and do this immediately, but you reduce the reliance on station and promotion. Maybe drop that from 35% to 20%. Features and benchmarks should still be very high, roughly a third. I reduced that from 35% to 30%. Still relying on about 25% for lifestyle and relationship, but we're adding more personal observation in here. Remember, I said that we're going from what you do to more about who you are. As they care more about who you are, your personal stories, your personal observation, who you are becomes more compelling, more appealing, and it also makes you more unique. And the growth phase is where you want to take advantage of that. So we've increased that by twice. We're going from 10% to 20% on personal observation. And we're adding a new component here in the growth stage called heart. You want to start adding some layers of character here and showing that you're a multidimensional personality and that you've got a heart, you're doing good things for the community. So what do we do here? To review the growth phase, we want to build layers of character. Good time to add a new character to the staff, by the way, a new cast member to the staff. If you're a solo show, it'd be a great time to put in a producer that has a presence on the air or a sidekick. If you've got 2 or 3 people on the show, it'd be a good time to add another layer and introduce that person when the heat is on the station. Add some personal stories, add some observation. It starts to matter more. It starts to resonate more. Keep building on your momentum. Keep adding new benefits. Keep capitalizing on your strengths. If you're doing some stories that are really working or features that work around relationships, you might want to add some more that also appeal, but you're doing it in a slightly different way. And keep adding marketing, advertising, promotion, and research fuel to the growth phase of your brand. Well, it's inevitable that as you grow, you can't keep growing forever. Eventually, the rock starts rolling downhill too and comes after you. That's what we call the maturity phase. As a brand starts to get mature, we get a little bit extended. And we want to extend the maturity phase for as long as we can, because this third stage of the product life cycle can be challenging, but it's also highly profitable. And a lot of personalities can stay in the maturity phase for a long, long time. Overall, our ratings are at a high level, but they've probably peaked. There's no more growth left. We can't wring any more listeners out of this stone. We've had steady growth all during the growth stage. Market's saturated. There's fewer new listeners. The majority of listeners who are ever going to become fans have already become fans, and it's really hard to keep growing. So realize that ratings may have peaked, but that doesn't mean that you're dead. You're just running to stay ahead of that rock that's coming downhill after you. You've got new competitors, and you've got more effective competitors. They've been on for a while now, and they've started to chip away. What we did in the past isn't that new anymore. It's not exciting. It doesn't capture the listener's imagination nearly as much as it used to. In a way, you're competing with yourself, because listeners listen to be surprised and delighted. And the more familiar they get with you, the more they love you, the harder it is to surprise and delight them. It takes more to satisfy them. They start taking you for granted a little bit more. You're still a part of their habits, and they still have expectations, but it's harder to fulfill those expectations. And even the best shows start losing some of their early adopters. Now, in format, as I consult stations on their programming and marketing, we realize that we have 2 choices. You can either grow up with your audience, or allow the audience to pass through you. And you might have a different strategy for both. But either way, you're losing some of those early adopters. Some of those who were fans for a while may not have been strong fans. They're starting to get bored. They're starting to find different options. And it's harder to create a buzz. Profits are also starting to decline, and this puts some pressure on radio stations. Ratings are down a little bit. Revenue is off a little bit. It's leveled off. The decrease in profits are often compounded by increasing commercial inventory, or we're compromising our brand principles to hang on to as much revenue as we possibly can. Does that sound familiar to anybody? This accelerates the maturity phase, and we don't want to accelerate the maturity phase. We want to extend the maturity phase. This can inflict some brand damage, and it brings on the decline phase before the decline phase needs to. So it's really important here that we stay strong in promoting and marketing and researching our brand. Think of it like a leaky bucket. What do we do about those listeners who pass through, or those listeners who are being lured off by others? Well, look at it this way. Your show is this bucket, and it's got holes in it. We can plug some of those holes, but we're also going to have to constantly refill that bucket. And that's refilling the bucket by getting our current listeners to listen more and to recruit some new listeners who are either aging into our target profile or they are just becoming aware of us for the first time. But it's important that we plug those holes, refill the bucket, and this is the phase where research is absolutely critical. And if you're going to spend a lot of money on research projects during the maturity phase, is the time where I would recommend spending the bulk of your money on research, because you already have high market awareness. And if you know how your brand is positioned, you can make the right decisions and the right choices to extend that maturity phase as long as you can. Just as economies of scale in the growth phase reduce our cost, the show remains highly familiar and highly popular. But a lot of times, this is where we slash that research budget. We slash that marketing budget, and that's a mistake here. We can't afford not to invest some resources to extend that, because once that decline phase starts, we really have some challenging profit problems. What should we sound like during the maturity phase? Number one, station and promotion become a little less significant, a little less important. Not unimportant, but I've reduced that from 25% down to about 15%. We're still doing features and benchmarks. It's still 25%, just like it's been all along. Lifestyle and relationship stays at about 25%. But we're going to capitalize on that relationship we have with our big fans and our longtime listeners who really have fallen in love with our personalities, really fallen in love with who we are. And we're increasing personal stories and personal observation to 25%. And at the same time, we're increasing heart to 10%. This is the area where we really want to win their hearts, and we want them to know what we stand for, and we can become more things to more people by expanding the brand a little bit. This is where we also need to constantly innovate. We want to move forward. You want to evaluate your old features and constantly introduce something new. The way Disneyland is constantly introducing new attractions and new rides to replace some of the old ones. When you do this, though, remember why they fell in love with you. Remember why they listened and why they were attracted in the first place, and don't violate those things. It's important to know who you are and what you stand for and defend that turf at all costs, but you want to do it in new ways, new and exciting ways that will attract new people and keep filling that leaky bucket. You can do a lot of things like working the fan base. Instead of giving away all your tickets to caller number 9 and doing contesting the traditional way, keep some back and just call some of those loyal fans who are in your database and invite them to go to the concert as your guest or sit with you at your show. You're big stars at this point, and they love being affiliated with you, but you need to use that to your advantage if you really want to capitalize. And one way is to make yourself more endearing to your fans. You can invite them to come in and watch the show being performed, or make them a part of the process of preparing a show for the next day. Capitalize on the fact that you're a celebrity and a star. Take them behind the scenes and work even harder to get familiar and to be personally engaged with them. Then add some more heart and community to the show. Just a dash of it. You're up to 10% now. mean more to the audience than just being a radio show. Be celebrities who happen to be on the radio. This allows you to perform beyond the ratings. P1s may be smaller in number, but you can mean more to those P1s by adding heart and exposing who you are. And never underestimate this stage. I once told a show that was very, very powerful, managed them for many years, and I saw signs that they were getting extended in the maturity phase and starting to head toward decline. And I told them that I think you're terrific, but the audience is going downhill. I was afraid that they had stopped innovating, they had stopped inventing, they'd stopped creating, they'd stopped evolving. And their response was, hey, listen, we're stars. They love us. It really doesn't matter what they do. We'll just keep doing the same show. They'll always be there for us. And within 2 years, their dynasty crumbled. Their target audience share declined by almost 70% within the next 2 years. And it didn't have to happen. Some of that erosion was inevitable, but it didn't have to happen that quickly. They entered the decline phase far sooner than they really needed to. When you're in the decline phase, the key is to think about how you can revive. A lot of marketing books will define this as rebirth. Now, it's hard to rebirth, but you can revive your brand. When you look at the classic product life cycle curve, the decline phase is very clearly demonstrated by fall in ratings, influence, and profits. Listeners are spending less time with you. Your TSL, time spent listening, is going down a little bit. They probably still say that you're their favorite show. So if you're in a diary type market that's based on recall, you're probably doing pretty well, but they don't behave that way. They're being lured to other choices that are more exciting to them. It's in the introduction or the growth phase. If you're in a PPM market, you're going to see this happen much more quickly. Now, this can be influenced by things that you can't control. Things like shifts in the music cycle or new competition that comes in, tastes that are shifting to another technology or delivery mechanism, and simply listener fatigue too. After they've been around a while and they've heard your show, it's not as exciting as it once was. Realize you can't prevent it, but you can slow it, and it doesn't have to decline all the way to zero. You can also revive brands that have begun to fade if you implement some of those things that we've been talking about. As you're in the decline phase, a few things to keep in mind and a couple of recommendations. Remain contemporary, remain relevant, move forward, drop every feature that feels old or worn out. Replace them with new, fresh, and exciting things. And if you've been evolving all the way along, remember in the growth phase, we're introducing new layers of content. In the maturity phase, we're getting rid of anything old and replacing it with something new. If you've been doing that all along, it's just a natural part of the evolution. This is a time where we develop our social agenda even more, not social media presence, but our social presence. Having a plan to be involved in the community and building your appeal to the heart. Might be you start your own foundation or a charity gala or a big party or a festival or a sporting event or a golf tournament. What cause are you going to pick up? Find an angle that you're truly passionate about and do something with it. Make sure it's something that you can do frequently, though, because just getting on a bike race once or twice a year isn't going to be enough to really have a social presence. Keep responding to the audience. Don't be the show that forgets how to court the listener. Over time, they're harder to impress, which means we have to work twice as hard just to stay even. I don't know the percentage of radio marriages that end in divorce, but I do know that there's no such thing as a no-fault divorce. If your audience is leaving you for someone else, it's all your fault, and you have to pay. Replacing that committed listener is costly. They win, and you lose. They walk out and never look back. So it's really important that we respond to them, that we listen to them, and we never take them for granted. This is where you're becoming more than a show. You're becoming a personality. And you can increase your market share by leveraging that, by diversifying your product mix. And the market may have already reached saturation for listening during the maturity phase, but you're going to leverage your influence in a lot of other ways. Now, I've had several stations that have been in the maturity and decline phase, and we were able to extend that a lot of different ways by providing new revenue-generating mechanisms. When I had Jeff and Jer at Star in San Diego many years ago, we realized Jeff and Jer was the biggest thing on our radio station, biggest thing on our brand, and our ratings at night were weak. We were an AC station, didn't have big ratings. We were like number 10 at night. So what's the best thing that we can do? Well, I want to extend Jeff and Jer's maturity phase. So we started playing Jeff and Jer at night, a replay, which exposes them to a different audience and gives their fans another opportunity to hear their show in case they missed it that morning. We also surrounded their content with more music, which made them fresher and more contemporary. It had a dramatic impact on extending that maturity phase and avoiding decline starting to come into it. Stations do other things like creating online stations. I'm working with stations who are developing specialty stations. Maybe you're a classic hits station that specializes in music from the 70s and 80s, and you've slowly been becoming more and more contemporary. Why not offer a 60s station online, or something that's specialty that keeps the product fresh and the brand fresh? This is a time to start podcasting some of your best features, offering new ways to inject enthusiasm and excitement into what it is that you're doing. Phil Hendry is a great air personality. You're probably familiar with him. He's also become an actor, and he's a podcaster. He's got a great website. And he said at Morning Show Boot Camp last year that you've got to evolve whatever you're doing, especially if you're in the entertainment business. You really can't keep the same show every day and rely on it to continually deliver. You have to evolve your craft. And then he paused and he said, at least in my world, you do. Phil Hendry. And I think it's the same with every radio station, every morning show, every personality, and every feature that's on that show. To review, your personality life cycle is unavoidable. It's going to happen. But you want to accelerate the introduction phase. You want to expand the growth phase. You want to extend the maturity phase. And you want to slow or delay the decline phase. Understand where you are, where your brand is, where your personality is, where your station is in the product life cycle. Use your strengths, leverage those strengths based on where you are in the relationship with your listeners. Market and advertise appropriately. And I'll throw research into that as well. Be appropriate for where you are in that phase. And most of all, never stop working and never stop innovating. This is hard work. It's a tough business. And we have to constantly stay at it and be diligent in that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the entire phase. If you would like some more information on the stages of personality content, I've got that for you too. If you do a search on the website, and I'll put a link to the different stages of personality content as well. I don't have it in this presentation, but it absolutely fits with that. And I'll also be putting the video up so you can watch that on demand and share it with your friends. Hopefully by the end of the day today. If not, then by the first thing tomorrow morning, so you can watch your email box for that to come in. You can go to my website anytime, tjohnsonmediagroup.com. You can email me, Tracy, Tracy, at tjohnsonmediagroup.com. Follow me on Twitter, at Tracy Johnson. And the Facebook page is Morning Radio. So if you have any questions or any comments or any suggestions, you want to go deeper in anything, I would be more than happy to answer those at this time. And I'll stay on the presentation as long as the questions come in. You can submit those questions through the GoToWebinar control panel. It's about 2/3 of the way down. Just click on that triangle. It'll pop up and you can type your question in there and I will answer it for you. First question comes in and says, you mentioned that the first day of a new show shouldn't be a typical show that you plan to produce. What should that first day of a new show sound like? Great question, Brian. I'm working, in fact, I got a phone call this afternoon with a show that's going on for the first time on Monday. And we've just been working on the plan there. And you know, the natural thing is to put a lot of time and attention into that first show. And we want all these features developed. And should we do this? And what's the production package going to sound like? My advice is to have a soft opening. Don't have that grand opening on the first day. On Saturday night, this past Saturday night, my wife and I and some friends of ours went to a brand new restaurant in San Diego. Big company opened a new restaurant. It's absolutely gorgeous and high expectations for it. But they only marketed it for that opening night to people in their email database, the people that they had a relationship with. They haven't done any advertising yet. They're not even open for lunch yet. They don't even take reservations yet. And in the email that came out to us, they said, we'd like to invite you down. We want to find out how we're doing. We want to get your feedback. We want to get your comments. But understand, we really don't know what we're doing yet. They didn't run their marketing yet. They were smart about how they opened it. They lowered our expectations, and their advertising isn't coming on until they work out the kinks. They iron some things out. So start with less. Rely more on the built-in elements that are the format appeal to the station, and put less pressure on trying to be great at everything on day one. Be great at the basics, and then put pressure on yourself to expand as quickly as possible. The restaurant that I referenced opens for lunch a week from Monday. They're going to go 2 weeks before they even open for lunch. They're going almost 2 weeks before they start taking reservations. I think there's a lot in that. This is a marathon, not a sprint. Now, we want to move forward and hurry and accelerate that introduction phase as much as we possibly can. The faster we're familiar, the better our introduction phase goes, the quicker we can get into growth. But we don't want to rush into that, because by rushing into it, growth may never come, because we only get that chance to create that impression that first time. Next question is, what growth phase do you think most shows fall into? Well, I think most shows fall into either the introduction phase or the decline phase. And I think that's sad, because the places that you want to be are in growth and maturity. I think there's a handful of shows in each market that are truly growing. I think there's a lot of shows that are in maturity, but I hear a lot of them that are in decline, and you can hear it, you can feel it, you can see it. And I think there's a lot of shows that are in the introduction stage and they don't know it. They think that the audience understands them and knows them just because they've been on the air for a year or 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. But just because you've been on for a long time doesn't mean that you're familiar. You may not stand for anything. They may not know. They may not know any one thing about you. By the way, that question comes in from one of my clients who is in the introduction phase and is doing a magnificent job of introducing themselves in a new time slot on a station that's been around for a while, and introducing themselves as personalities for really the first time on the station. And they're doing it in a really smart way, growing it slowly, a couple of benchmark features that they're executing very, very well. And we're already seeing some early ratings growth, but they're still in the introduction stage, and they're going to be in that introduction stage for a while. Once it gains some roots and really starts to grow, then we take a little bit of a different approach. And some personalities might say that that's letting the leash off. I say it's just developing the show with content that's appropriate for the stage that it happens to be in. Let's see, a couple of people saying thank you for this. This is very instructive. Questions saying I've got a show that is in the maturity phase, but they don't want to admit it. They think that they are still in the growth stage, and it's hard to get their attention about evolving or changing anything on their show. What do I do? I think that the one thing you don't want to do is scare them, but you do want to get their attention and get them to take their status seriously. I think it's also important, if you're a program director and working with a show that's in the maturity or decline stage, that it not be presented to them as a wake-up call or a challenge or come off as being negative at all, but get them to recognize where they are and that there's nothing wrong with that it's okay. I love shows that are in the maturity phase because they're highly profitable. It means that the audience has fallen in love with them, and you got a lot of things to really work with there. But it's important to know what stage that's in so you can respond appropriately and you can approach it the right way. So be very supportive of them. Think of it like an athlete. If you're a baseball fan and you've got a 37-year-old outfielder that's a future Hall of Famer and is not quite as fast as they used to be, isn't quite as strong as they used to be, but they still really know how to win baseball games. That's a valuable player that you want on your team. They're not quite capable of doing what they used to do. It's different. They're in a different stage of their career. And so you put different things around them. You build the team differently around them. Same thing with personalities in the personality stages and the product life stages. You surround those personalities with different things. You behave differently. That player is marketed differently when they're a future Hall of Fame star than when they're an up and coming star. Same thing with what you do on the air. And remember, you're building more about the personality and about the personal stories, about leveraging that database that you've been building when they were in the growth stage. That's where that database becomes really, really valuable. So work with the show, get them to participate in the decisions around the show, get them to recognize that being in that maturity stage isn't a bad thing. It's not a negative thing, but it's acknowledging the reality, and let them know that you're still big fans of theirs and that you're in their corner. You want to be a good coach, a good programmer, a good manager, regardless of what stage they're in. Now, if they refuse to accept that and they don't take the challenges of responding to the audience differently because of where they are today, you've got a whole different set of problems. That's where I think it's really important to do research. I can recommend some research companies to you. I can recommend some tactics, some research tactics that don't cost anything. But a lot of times when the personalities see the research and they see what the audience is saying, whether that's focus groups or quantitative research, it has a pretty dramatic impact. It's also a good time, self-promotion here, it's a good time to bring in a talent coach, bring in a consultant that can talk to them a little bit differently. A lot of times the value of a consultant is to say the same thing that you've been saying, but this time it gets heard because it's coming from a different voice. And that different voice can have an impact with a lot of personalities. Next question is about the introduction stage. Introduction stage seems like it's the most experimental and the most fun. What if we want to stay in the introduction stage and don't want to move on to the next one? I totally get what you're saying. It's kind of like college radio. We don't really know what we're doing. We're kind of figuring it out. Introduction stage can be really frustrating because a lot of times we think that things are going along really, really well, but they're really not. They're not going as fast as we'd like for them to, and we don't know enough about what we're doing to know that it's working or not working. So I think that the introduction stage is one of those areas that can be exciting. It can be fun, but you want to get out of introduction and get into growth as quickly as you can, because growth is really what is the most fun. That's where all the action is and where the people are really starting to talk about it. If you've had a station or a show or a feature that's truly in that growth stage, that's where you want to stay, because there's nothing like riding that wave. So again, thank you very much for being a part of this. I really appreciate your time and attention. And if I can answer any questions for you personally, reach out to me anytime. Thank you a lot.